All right, this is episode 1 of Sunday School with Ron. Today is an introduction to the book of Hebrews. So, in this, I just want to emphasize that context is king here. In translation work, context comes even before the literal meaning of words. Without context, we have a tendency to supply our personal interpretations based on our culture and upbringing, almost like inductive logic. The Bible is written for you, but not to you. It has culture and historical and literary factors that are meaningful for its target audience. So it is for this reason we need an introduction to the book of Hebrews. The Bible doesn't, or this book doesn't start off like a New Testament letter. It doesn't have a salutation. So this has made some scholars think it's a sermon. But it does end with a valediction or farewell, just like a letter would. As far as the contents, it contains a series of arguments placed in a logical order, and they are forming a larger argument. There's a definite structure as well as a literary style. The person that wrote this book was very familiar with poetry. It just as we had begun our study in Matthew with a summary statement that the evangelist was attempting to prove Jesus is king. For Hebrews, I wanted to provide this overarching purpose or occasion of the book. So the author of Hebrews wrote to exhort his audience to reject the Jewish teachings and to remain faithful to Jesus. The authorship. We don't know who wrote it. Clement of Alexandria, who lived from approximately 150 AD to 215, and Origen of Alexandria, who lived around 185 AD to 254, acknowledged that there was a variety of opinions on the authorship of Hebrews in their day. Paul was the candidate named most frequently, but scholars also suggested Barnabas, Luke, Apollos, and Clement of Rome, who was alive during the time of the apostles in the first century. And there's good and bad reasons for all of those particular choices. While Paul was considered as the author very early on, most modern interpreters reject that idea. There are some substantial reasons for that rejection. The book was, in fact, written by an anonymous author, and Paul had a practice to name himself in his epistles. In fact, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it makes it clear that Paul was deeply concerned about forgeries that had spread under his name. So it seems unlikely that he would have failed to identify himself had he written this book. Hebrews emphasizes subjects that don't receive much attention in Paul's letters. Um, the author here mentions Melchizedek 3 times. He drew attention to the Old Testament tabernacle, and he dealt at length with Christ as high priest. Taken together, these themes distinguish the book of Hebrews from what we know and see in Paul's letters. Third, and the strongest reason for doubting Paul's authorship is the way the writer of Hebrews distanced himself from the first generation of followers. So it says here in chapter 2 and verse 3, this salvation which was first announced by the Lord was confirmed to us by those who heard him. The author was not present to have heard the words directly from Jesus. Instead, the author and his audience had the gospel verified for them by people who had heard Jesus directly. The author's admission that he received his Christian faith secondarily contrasts with passages like Galatians 1 and 1, verses 11, 12, 1 Corinthians 11:23, where Paul insisted that he received the gospel directly from the Lord Jesus. The author's profile. Because the author quotes Old Testament passages using the Greek Septuagint and not the Hebrew, we believe that he was probably a Hellenistic Jew. That is, a Jew that was brought up in a Greek household or lived in a Greek city and immersed in the culture and education. He has significant knowledge of the Old Testament, and this shows his Jewish heritage, but his use of the language also shows Greek tendencies. Whoever he is, he's been described as a passionate intellect. Um, Craig S. Keener, professor of New Testament of Asbury Theological Seminary in Kentucky, says this from the contents of the letter of Hebrews, there are a number of things we can say about the author. One is that he was brilliant. He knew the Septuagint backward and forward. He knew how to link text in ways that were very persuasive to traditional Jewish audiences. Probably he was a Hellenistic Jewish author. Even though the author of Hebrews should be considered an intellectual, he was not a detached academic. He was deeply passionate about the Christian faith. His devotion and passion for his fellow Christians is evident in the way he writes. So listen to the way that he empathizes with his audience here in chapter 10 and verses 33 and 34. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. In a similar way, in Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 1 through 2, he showed his passion for Christ, and he says this. He says, "Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and yet sat down on the right hand of the throne of God." It's difficult to read something like this and not see how passionate the author is. He's more than just an intelligent man. He's a passionate and intelligent man. We'll stop there today, and we'll pick up in the next episode.